There are parts of this world which are still at war, and have been for quite some time. Their histories are dark and complicated, but undoubtedly marred with the blood of innocence. Groups of people sharing the same twisted beliefs are known to do the craziest things in order to reach their ideals. This is not your usual prison escape story involving petty criminals, con artists, or modern-time Bonnie and Clydes. This is the astonishing story of the Sarpoza prison tunneling escape of 2011. Almost 500 Taliban prisoners broke out of jail without being detected by the prison guards. It was April 25, 2011. Summer was close. But while for most Westerners, summer means nothing more or less than a great opportunity for vacation, there are people in this world with other priorities for the season. In the spring of 2011, the Taliban were getting ready for the upcoming fighting season in Afghanistan. The Taliban is an Islamic fundamentalist and militant movement in Afghanistan, which emerged in 1994 as a prominent faction in the Afghan Civil War. The group ruled almost the entire Afghanistan for 5 years, between 1996 and 2001, before being toppled by the United States and its allies. The Taliban recaptured Kabul, the country's capital, in 2021, and have since implemented their incredibly restrictive policies. In other words, they don't really believe in human rights, but no other country in the world believes in their government either. Before regaining control over Afghanistan, though, the Taliban fought hard and dirty for years. The Sarpoza prison escape is just one example of their dangerous actions. With the fighting season so close, the Taliban needed reinforcements. And what better way to get fresh soldiers than to help hundreds of sympathizers escape prison? In April 2011, the Sarpoza prison in Kandahar was housing some 500 Taliban, all held in the prison's political section. The highest profile Taliban inmates were held at a facility outside of Bagram Air Force Base in eastern Afghanistan, while other key prisoners were held by the Afghan government in a high-security wing of the main prison in Kabul. Even though these men were generally considered a low-grade Taliban, they were still dangerous, and more than eager to resume fighting for their cause. At that point, by April 25th, some of them had been serving for years, but the tide was turning. They could feel it, even though they had no official information from their superiors. But they knew that, only a few weeks before, a Taliban suicide bomber had managed to blow up Kandahar's police chief. Another suicide bomber had come close to killing Afghanistan's defense chief right in Kabul. All they had was their undying faith in their cause, but what they also had was a not-so-strict prison, with guards that would smoke marijuana and heroin on a daily basis and then fall asleep without a worry in the world. Perhaps that's why many of the prisoners weren't too surprised by the events of early Monday morning, April 25th. There were only 3 or 4 people in the entire prison who knew what was about to go down. Months before, they'd managed to get copies of the prison keys. An important detail: they needed to make sure that they'd be able to open their cells. It was just before midnight when the plan was finally greenlit. The prison building was quiet, shrouded in darkness. Everyone was asleep. Well, almost everyone. The 3 men started waking up their fellow prisoners. They worked quietly, but efficiently. They knew they had to. Breaking almost 500 Taliban out of jail can't be easy work. They decided to wake up the prisoners in groups of 4 or 5. This way, they figured, there wouldn't be that much racket. Not that the prison guards would necessarily react even if there was. There was another reason they needed to work with small groups only. The tunnel could get crowded, and oxygen was limited. Yes, a tunnel. It had been 5 months in the making, but none of the Taliban inside the prison, nor the Afghan officials, knew anything about the tunnel. For months, a group of 18 insurgents from outside the prison had dug and burrowed thousands of feet underground. In order to avoid drawing suspicion on the huge mounds of brown soil, the insurgents sold truckloads of the earth in Kandahar's bazaar. Everything about the escape had been thoroughly planned. So in order to keep things running smoothly, only a few people were woken up at a time. Each group walked quietly, room by room, until they reached a cell with a hole in the cement floor. The opening was about 3 feet in diameter. After a 5-foot drop, the prisoners had to walk some 1,180 feet in order to reach the other side, where the tunnel opened in a house. Sections of the tunnel were lit with electric lights. There were also fans, which ventilated the space. It wasn't an amateur creation. The Taliban had worked for 5 months in order to get it ready, and they had assistance from engineers. The tunnel led from the prison's political wing to a house southwest of the prison, which had been previously rented by the Taliban. In fact, the house had been searched by authorities only 2 months before the escape, maybe because of its close proximity with the prison, but authorities had somehow failed to find the entrance to the tunnel. Everything ran smoothly. Group after group went in the tunnel and came out on the other side. The guards were probably fast asleep. Nobody had any clue about what was happening inside the prison. Still, the Taliban were ready to retaliate if needed. They placed suicide bombers inside the house. Each of them was ready to fight and sacrifice themselves if it meant the others would escape. After reaching the house, the escapees were taken in vehicles to a safe place of the Taliban. Almost 500 Taliban were broken out of Sarpoza prison. The whole operation took 4.5 hours. At about 4 o'clock on Monday morning, a single prison guard wandered into the prison's political wing. But to his astonishment, the entire section was empty. 500 people were gone, but not without a trace. For some reason, the prisoners had left their clothes, shoes, and turbans behind. Authorities were alerted, and the investigation began. Mohammed Tahir, the head of the team investigating the escape, immediately thought that the escape had been aided by several prison guards. The Taliban were quick to claim the escape and even brag about it. They provided the details of the escape, relishing in their success and their wit. Toyalai Wessa, the governor of Kandahar, publicly stated that security forces had failed in their duty. Wessa also said efforts were already underway to recapture the prisoners. Some of the escaped prisoners have been recaptured by security forces during searching operations, and huge operations have launched inside and on the outskirts of Kandahar city for the rest of them, he said. The shame of this escape was made even more bitter by the fact that it wasn't the first of its kind. 3 years prior, in June 2008, the Taliban had managed to break out 870 inmates from the same prison. That time around, they had used a suicide bomber to break a hole in the prison in order to free the prisoners. This is a blow, presidential spokesman Wahid Omar said after the prison escape. A prison break of this magnitude of course points to a vulnerability. The magnitude of the event was even greater considering it had all happened under the noses of Afghan and NATO officials. To make matters worse, the Taliban said they had freed more than 500 of their fellow insurgents and that about 100 of them were commanders. 4 of them were former provincial chiefs. The security around the prison was enhanced after the escape. The Afghan uniformed police also established a checkpoint directly across the highway from the prison, directly above the tunnel exit. But the escape was a big blow to the Afghan authorities, with suspicions about government officials and their inability to protect civilians skyrocketing. At least 71 of the escaped prisoners were allegedly recaptured, though the numbers aren't exactly confirmed. As of 2021, the Taliban are once again ruling over Afghanistan. They swore to bring about a truly Islamic state, and they also expressed their desire to have good relations with the United States. But their idea of an Islamic state and good relations with the rest of the world doesn't necessarily seem to involve the pledge to protect human rights.